facilitate our discussion about this issue, our moderator will be Gloria Borger, who serves as CNN's Chief of Political Analyst. She appears daily on the Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer and is a regular contributor to John King USA and Anderson Cooper 360. Borger joined CNN in September 2007 with a wealth of Washington expertise and contacts that are clearly reflected in her reports and analyses. Borger writes a regular column for CNN.com and plays a key role in the network's political coverage, including CNN's America Votes 2010 and America Votes 2008 coverage, which earned the network a Peabody Award. And as panelists, we have Charlie Cook. He is editor and publisher of the Cook Political Report and a political analyst for NBC News and National Journal, where he writes a twice-weekly column. Now, Cook is considered one of the nation's leading authorities on American politics and U.S. elections. In 2010, he was a co-recipient of the American Political Science Association's prestigious Carey Williams Award to honor a, quote, major journalistic contribution to our understanding of politics. We are also joined by Bill McInturff, who is a partner and co-founder of Public Opinion Strategies, a national political and public affairs survey research firm. Since its founding in 1991, the firm has completed more than 5 million interviews with voters and consumers in all 50 states and over a dozen foreign countries, and they have conducted more than 3,500 focus groups. McInturff is actively engaged in American politics, conducting national survey research on behalf of the Republican Governors Association. And we also have Don Baer. He is Worldwide Vice Chairman, Vice Strategy Officer of Burson-Marsteller. He has built a varied career as a leading media and communications executive. He has extensive experience in the strategic, creative, and operational side of the private and public sectors, including senior roles with the White House, global companies, and U.S. media organizations. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, your distinguished panel, and please, Gloria, take it away.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for having us here today. I must say I'm thrilled to be moderating a panel with these three gentlemen because I think they know more about American elections than just about anybody I can think of. And I want to get right to it because since Barack Obama became president in 2008, we've seen tectonic shifts on the global stage, both economic and political. You here all know about that. I don't have to tell you. But we've also seen a global economic crisis and a domestic economic crisis here at home. In 2008, last presidential election, the major campaign issue, one of them was foreign policy. In fact, Barack Obama ran on ending the war in Iraq. It was a key component of his successful presidential campaign. John McCain was a hawk, but he also had national security credibility. Barack Obama was seen as being a bit green on national security. Don't do that again.
That's loose news.
Well, there we go. Okay, so now we fast forward to this campaign, and ironically, to me at least, and I'd love to hear what these gentlemen have to say about it, Barack Obama has the national security credentials that he lacked in the 2008 campaign, including, but not limited to, of course, killing Osama bin Laden. But it's the economy, stupid, as one of my colleagues at CNN famously said, that is dogging him. So my first question here, and let me put it to Bill McInturff, who does one of the best polls, or maybe the best poll, I should say, the NBC Wall Street Journal poll on politics. Is national security, how much, let me put it that way, how much will national security and foreign policy matter to American voters in this campaign?
Not much.
Okay, thank you very much.
Me, zero.
I'm
a different view.
I was answering quickly, but I do want to answer somewhat more thoughtfully, which is that foreign policy in a campaign, presidential campaign context is when American lives are lost and when American lives are at stake. And so, although I disagree with the President's decision, his decision at the moment to remove all combat troops from Iraq is dramatically supported. And if we go through 2012, where we are phasing out of Afghanistan, and Iraq is stable, and American lives are not being lost around the world, then I do think that functionally there'll be almost nothing that will affect the campaign. But we live in an unstable time, and so there's always the prospect that there could be an unexpected event that shifts and compels a very different debate, and you always have to be aware of that. But I'm just saying, for a rubric for the room, if American lives are lost or at stake, it's a critical issue to the public. If the answer is no American lives are at stake, it doesn't matter what happens anywhere in the world.
Charlie?
I mean, I don't really disagree with Bill, but at the same time, I mean, right now, American lives are being lost in Afghanistan. American lives are getting lost on a more sporadic basis in Iraq. And you know, unfortunately, this is not on the radar screen right now. I mean, you know, I think the top 5 issues facing the country, politically speaking, are the economy, the economy, the economy, the economy, and the economy. And so, if there was some dramatic surge, some huge incident that shifts the spotlight, the news media onto Afghanistan or Iraq by the end of the year, that would pop back up again. But as of right now, it's just sort of not, I think, not a major factor.
I just happen to have our recent CNN poll here, which we asked what's important to you when you vote. And the economy, of course, as you point out, is number 1 at 54%. Foreign policy next to last at 23%. Moral issues is last at 18%. Go figure. Okay, Don, you have a different view.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that, so let me disagree. This is a place where I think poll results are necessary but not sufficient to actually explain the full impact of foreign policy and national security issues in the context of a presidential election. And I say this from the context of having been President Clinton's White House Communications Director in the '96 election. First off, in the last election, 2008, at the presidential level, in the general election, national security wasn't really an issue because by then we were already in the drink of the sort of deep economic trouble that we were in, that we're still emerging from. And it was the economy then as well. However, in the Democratic primary, as you pointed out, President Obama, or candidate Obama's position on the Iraq War, I would argue was the decisive factor. And it was what ultimately led him, along with a lot of other perceptual issues that were very important, to defeat Hillary Clinton for the nomination, because she would not walk away from her previous support for that war. But let's roll forward. How many people in this room have heard about the 3 a.m. ad from the 2008 primary campaign? The 3 a.m. ad, the ad that the Clinton campaign ran against Obama, that raised the question, who do you want answering the phone in the White House when it rings at 3 a.m.? Pretty, okay. In the business that we're all in, that's what we would call more or less success, although, of course, at the end of the day, Obama won the nomination.
But he's still calling Hillary.
That's right. That's right. Well, there was the famous New Yorker cover that followed that ad that showed the two of them in the same bed when the phone rang. Whatever. So, and I just to be a little present for history, I was the first person who heard about that ad. The person who wrote that ad was Mark Penn, who's going to be here today, who is my colleague and partner, who wrote it and walked into the office and read it to me. And I suppose I could have been the person to say, don't go there, but I didn't, because I thought it did frame the issue pretty well for that moment. But the point is that President Obama has answered the question that the 3 a.m. ad raised. He has basically shown that he has the capacity and the strength and the leadership necessary to lead the country in foreign policy issues. Now, we can disagree on some of the positions that he's taken. I don't agree with all of them either. But I think from a broad perceptual standpoint, it's generally regarded that their conduct of foreign policy and national security issues has been done well, right? And that America feels more or less safe and secure to the extent we can, in a very, very dangerous and chaotic time, in the hands of the Obama administration when it comes to these issues. So let me tell you why I think this is more important than just they say 0% or 6% say that the issues matter. I think this election, as much as anything, is going to be not about one issue or the other. Certainly the economy is going to be the landscape against which it's all run. It's about the question of leadership. It's about the question of who and which party, but also which candidate and which team actually has the capacity to lead America forward out of the mess that we are in. And I would agree with Senator Nunn that on the domestic and economic front, the Obama White House administration has a very steep hill to climb. But on foreign policy, they have a pretty good argument. And the country actually makes these judgments, in my view, based on what I've seen over time, through a mix of perceptions. And I just want to go back briefly to 1995 and 1996, which was a time at the beginning of 95 where very few people thought Bill Clinton would be able to be reelected because of the 94 Republican Revolution. And you have to remember what was happening exactly 16 years ago now, as the Clinton administration, President Clinton, was actually asserting himself not with the government shutdown, which was a key part of what sort of ultimately led to the perception that he was in a better position to lead the country than were the Republicans, but with regard to foreign policy. So right now, 16 years ago, the Dayton Peace Accords that ultimately ended the war in Bosnia were being negotiated. It was a huge, great international signing in Paris on December the 14th. Right now, almost right now, 16 years ago, President Clinton became the first sitting U.S. president to visit Northern Ireland in a very emotional, sort of rapturous reception there. He lighted the Belfast Christmas tree while he was there, a Christmas tree, by the way, that had been brought over from Nashville, Tennessee, Swing State. You know, our whole message, not to sort of sound too cynical about these things, we wanted to use his presence on the world stage, showing that he was able to perform the jobs of the commander-in-chief and peacemaker in the world as a way to help drive the perception that he was doing the job of being president for people.
Okay, and let me put this to Bill McInturff and to Charlie, which is that if Don is right, and this is an issue of leadership, which of course every presidential election, I would argue, is about leadership, right? The Republican Party right now seems to be having some divisions within itself about how to lead on foreign policy. And there's an isolationist strain in the Republican Party right now. Michelle Bachmann didn't want to go into Libya under any circumstance. Mitt Romney's kind of walking the fine line there. So how does this play out for the Republican Party, which is traditionally sort of the hawkish party, but now even John McCain, your former client, has called them isolationists, and how does that play into Barack Obama? I'm a strong foreign leader.
Well, this is way out of the panel because you have a range of opinion. If Don's thesis was correct, then Bill Clinton in 1992 would have been hammered by George Bush, who was perceptually way ahead of Clinton on anything related to strength, leadership, commander-in-chief. And in 2008, John McCain had 15, 20, 25-point margins over Barack Obama in the late October on commander-in-chief, prepared to lead, and all that stuff. And neither one, and both guys got hammered. The Republican Party does have an isolationist wing. It was true when Pat Buchanan ran in 1992. It's a strain of the Republican Party. It's not the majority strain, and the Republican nominees are not going to embrace it. Our country is terribly tired and fatigued of combat operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they think they should be ended, and they want our troops home. That is a broad national consensus. Under what conditions you bring them home, and how you justify those years and years of occupation and our presence there, and how you don't take those troops out in a way that puts those countries right back into danger. That's a public policy discussion. But the Republican nominee is much more likely to be part of the majority Senate of the Republican Party, which is still an interventionist party, and a party that believes in the use of American force around the world. And that's what I anticipate the Republican nominee is going to essentially embody.
Charlie, you're our expert on congressional Senate races. Will this question at all arise in local races or Senate races?
In the absence of some huge new event to grab the attention, I don't think it's going to be a significant factor, presidential, Senate, House, anything else. I mean, I understand how Don is framing up the election, but to me, first and foremost, it's going to be a referendum on the last 4 years. It's going to be a referendum on the president. And in times when the economy is doing well, then that allows foreign policy and the environment and all these other issues to rise up, to bubble up to the top and become pivotal. But at this point, you know, I think when you have 9.1% unemployment, when you have change in real personal disposable income in a steeper decline than any black diamond ski slope, when you've got, when you got an economy that with very little hope of getting above 3%, where you start creating jobs between now and the next election, you know, then it's economy. So I don't think it's going to be a factor. I really don't, unless there's some new event that changes the orientation and the focus.
I just have one quick thing, because Joyce was kind of to mention my polling for the Republican Governors Association. And in the summer of 2006, I was talking to the governor of a large Midwestern state and was telling about his state rep candidates. They just had a campaign school, the governor done the last event. And the state rep candidates who were running for office for the first time were going door to door. And they'd say, hi, I'm so-and-so, I'm running for state rep. And people were saying, what the hell do we do about Iraq? And they would say, I'm like running for state rep, like rural Missouri, you know, I'm not like the Iraq guy. And the point the governor was making was when your state rep candidates are getting grilled about your Iraq position, that the Republican Party was in massive trouble in 2006 because we had both some concerns about Katrina, the economy, but this was a country that was fed up and wanted to know what we're doing in Iraq. And I'm talking about there can be times when American lives are at stake where like that story, that kind of issue can be a public debate that seeps down to that level. Or like this, failing another episode, it can be a time when it is totally invisible.
Well, it can also, let me raise this, that it can be part of a general narrative about a presidential campaign. And part of the narrative that we've been hearing about Barack Obama from the Republican Party is this notion of exceptionalism, and that Barack Obama in Libya, for example, leads from behind, has been the Republican phrase. After Gaddafi fell, Republicans came out and thanked the French and the British for leading in that. And so it can become, and let me put this to Don and then we can talk about it, part of a notion about Barack Obama, which is that Americans want to be number one, even though we can't afford to lead in everything. And so there is this notion that Barack Obama doesn't see America as exceptional or leading, and they take some offense to that. Is that a problem for the president?
I think you're, first off, I think you're right to identify the need for there to be narrative. And that's what I was trying to say before, that the competence in this field is one part of the narrative of leadership. I agree that that's certainly a theme that you hear and will hear more of, both from his critics in the Republican Party, but obviously also from critics in the Democratic Party. Having said that, he's got the record of the last 4 years, and it's interesting because, to Bill's point, you've got a more isolation and strain in the country and a Republican Party largely that is speaking to that strain.
And some Democrats speaking
certainly,
to
of course, which so the fact of the matter is that that I'm not sure the Republicans will be the best voices to drive that narrative most effectively. Let me say one other quick thing. Foreign policy is not just about troops on the ground and wars. Global economics and the global economy are a key foreign policy issue that, of course, blends naturally into domestic politics and the domestic economy, and everyone gets it. I mean, I think the biggest foreign policy issue, if you will, of this election cycle will be China. And the Chinese economy and the role that it is beginning to play or is already playing on the world stage, and how we feel about that from the standpoint of American competitiveness. That's a big, big issue. I think we're going to see some pretty serious clashes around that issue between the parties.
Well, let me just, since you've raised China, I want to read something to you. I'm going to have Charlie talk about it, but we can all talk about this. On China, Herman Cain on China from the other day. This came across my desk. I just decided to bring it with me. I see China as a national security threat. He said they long for a military like ours. They're already testing. They already commissioned a brand new aircraft carrier. They are testing in order to improve their nuclear arsenal, et cetera, et cetera. So essentially, China as a national security threat. Does that work as a political issue, Charlie?
I think China is, and dealing with China is a huge challenge for our country. I think it will have zero impact on this election and negligible part of the dialogue during this campaign.
Yeah, again, I just do this example. There was a University of Maryland basketball player, Len Bias, who died of unexpected cocaine. And instantly, drugs became the #1 issue. And people say, oh my God, drugs will be the #1 issue in the campaign. And I would say, there's really not a pro-drug candidate. Candidates are about contrast. And I can pretty much assume that both people in major parties will be against drugs. And so the reason that China is, in my mind, not likely to be a major issue in 2012 is that whatever the actual policy is, that rhetorically anybody running for office is going to talk about the Chinese threat, our need to compete, what America needs to do better to compete with China. There's not going to be, I don't believe, some huge difference where, some major candidate says, well, don't worry about China. And let them do whatever they want to do, we're fine. The difference rhetorically between the two campaigns will be so distinct, I just don't see how China becomes this.
Let me, again, I hate to be so contrarian about this, but I just think we have to roll forward a year.
A little
bit less, that's what we're going to do, but a little bit less than a year to the presidential debates. One of them is going to be exclusively on foreign policy. And the issues are not likely to be you pulled the troops out prematurely from Iraq and now more people are dying there, although we don't know. Let's hope that that's not the circumstance. But there are going to be attempts. There are going to be moments that the Republican candidate is going to try to manufacture in order to attack President Obama. And I'm willing to bet right now a lot of money that the principal one in that debate will be the administration's conduct of China policy and how we have dealt with them as a world economic power, for good or bad. I'm not sort of endorsing or in any way attacking. I just think that will be the issue. I see in polls, and I also see it among sort of my business clients and things out in the country all the time, the way that China, the word, the country, the sense of a threat economically, not militarily, but economically, has become a real life.
Well, but on Capitol Hill, there's tariffs. Democrats and Republicans have joined to impose tariffs in the Senate on China. I don't think it'll go anywhere, but in the House, because they won't bring it up.
If there was by some miracle or perverse set of circumstances, Herman Cain or Michelle Bachmann or someone like that became the Republican nominee, yeah. But we kind of know who the Republican nominee is going to be.
Share that with us.
Whether Republicans know it or not, they're going to end up with Mitt Romney. And the distinction between Romney and Obama, just to kind of advance what Bill was saying, the difference between them on foreign policy will be, I think, relatively subtle. And I don't think you're going to have, I don't think there's a jingoistic bone in Mitt Romney's body, and there certainly isn't in Barack Obama's body. They'll come up with things to talk about. They've got to fill an hour and a half in a foreign policy debate. But that's just not going to be what drives the outcome in this election.
Well, let me ask this to Bill. So say we're in the foreign policy debate in the fall, a year from now, and say it is, as Charlie predicts, Mitt Romney against Barack Obama. What is, I'll let you speak for the Republican, you speak for Democrat. What is Mitt Romney's, what are his debating points against Barack Obama? Is it exceptionalism? Is it, you tell me.
I'm sorry not to be all phony about this. I'm saying that that in the absence of some other substantial development in the world, I'm concurring with Charlie. I'm just saying that Mitt Romney will be relatively mainstream. The president and look, here's the thing about the president. The president said we're going to get out of Guantanamo, and we're still there. The president said that, we would be out of Afghanistan, he upped the troops. The things that I like and admire the president did are the things that if I were an incredibly liberal Democrat in the 5 or 6% of the country, I'd run a primary against him. And I'd run a primary against him with all the stuff that I've admired and liked the president's done. And that's a Democrat primary. But it's not something that fundamentally Mitt Romney disagrees with.
But he has to have a way of differentiating himself. And by the way,
He'll say something, but it doesn't matter.
And so all I'm suggesting is that,
Okay, we won't watch that debate.
all I'm suggesting is, I think Iraq, I don't know what's going to happen. We have people in the room who know. It's worthwhile listening to me talking about American politics and public opinion. I probably know a good deal more than the folks here. I don't know any more about what's going to happen in Iraq, and there's tons of people here with a lot more experience and judgment than I do about that. My guess is it's not going to be happy. And that actually you can't go from 140,000 troops to 140 people and think things are going to be fine in Iraq. There will be too much influence on Iran. The president has probably not done enough to stop Syria, Iran, and others. I think he's totally bungled the Middle East peace process. I think all of that's part of the debate. I'm just saying politely that in the absence of American lives being lost, that's an hour-and-a-half debate that has, and I have respect Don's point of view about his broader leadership and all that. But let me also speak about Governor Romney. Governor Romney is an incredibly, truly a really smart guy who knows a ton, who's very disciplined, who's worked incredibly hard to prepare for this race. And in terms of knowing the world leaders, in terms of having a worldview and having a maturity of judgment, the kind of basic threshold about do I feel comfortable this man can be president, I have no doubt about his ability in an hour and a half to convince most reasonable people, agree with them or not, this guy could maturely and with judgment and judgment function as commander-in-chief.
And you're almost certainly right that it may well be that when it comes to the race, all he has to do is to neutralize the issue and at least leave people with the perception he's good enough to be able to get this done. And it's also true, we know, we can all look back over the elections that we've all known about, that foreign policy typically has an impact only in the negative, not in the positive. The Carter people are still saying, but what about Camp David? I'm not disagreeing with all of that. And I do think, though, it will be, look, it's already been signaled. The Democrats are going to try to run a very negative campaign against Romney. They're going to try to, as they've been saying a little bit lately too much to people around town, do to him what the Republicans did to Kerry in 2004. That was, in part, an attack on Kerry's ability to conduct national security policy, but of course that's when the Iraq War was raging, and we were just 3 years out from September 11th and all of that. So I do think the Republicans are going to have to think, and Romney's going to have to think about how does he establish his bona fides on this issue, because, Bill, most people don't know what the way to know him and understand, and appreciate how good it can be on these issues.
Charlie, do you think that the administration has laid out anything that sort of constitutes an Obama doctrine that voters can sort of say, all right, this is Barack Obama's done X, Y, and Z, and that's the way he approaches the world, and I like that, or I disagree with that?
No, that's a little over my pay grade. But what I would say, though, is that to me, people see a president as either competent or not competent on various things. And while there are some people, and probably some people in this room, that might argue whether he's been competent or not on foreign policy matters, I think the broad public opinion is that he has been competent on foreign policy. I think if this election were going to be settled on foreign policy, I don't think he'd have any problem getting reelected this time. But it's not. And that's why I think he's a distinct underdog in terms of running for reelection, because it's not going to be on the one thing that, as unexpected as it may have been, he turned out to be actually reasonably competent. It's going to be on economy and domestic policy, and this is where people, I think, a substantial portion of independent voters are very disappointed. They're not sure he's been up to the job. They've been disappointed about the performance. They don't have a lot of hope that things are going to get better anytime soon, and they don't see him as having changed the way Washington works. Now, did he inherit a lousy situation? Absolutely, no question about it. But I think you can find a lot of people who say sort of he was dealt a lousy hand and then he misplayed it. And I think that's what this election is going to be about. And you know, it is what it is. And you know, they made choices, and now they're having to live with choices that turn out to be probably somewhat ill-advised back in the first 2 years.
Well, let's talk, one area we really haven't touched on yet, which I think is so important, is defense spending, military spending, this perception of America's strength. Obviously, Leon Panetta right now, as we speak, is trying to cut $400 billion out of the defense budget. If the super committee does not come up with some kind of a deal, you're going to get huge cuts in defense spending. They won't take effect immediately, but would take effect. And I was struck by Newt Gingrich's line in a recent debate, and I'm going to predict right here a surge for Newt Gingrich within the next few weeks. Watch that happen. He said, I'm a hawk, but I'm a cheap hawk. Is that the future?
Well, again, and I don't think there's going to be any distinction between the president and a Republican who's saying that line. That's kind of where the country is. This is I want to say it again, this is a country that is fatigued with 10 years of wars, essentially 10 years of wars around the world in our commitment to Afghanistan and Iraq, and they said, I've lost the narrative, I've lost the thread. Whatever was the rationale for being there, it's over. We should be out of these places. Let's move on. And there is no public support for substantially more defense spending. When you look at the polls, let's go back to what I do for a living, and you talk about substantial reductions in defense spending as part of what should we do to balance the budget, what's interesting is you get a really pretty close call, and it's something that really bifurcates, again, by political party. And I think the super committee was well structured because the level of automatic cuts in defense is something I don't think the Republicans in the House really want to do. And the Medicare cuts are not something the Democrats really want to do in that magnitude. So they actually did create a pretty good process to give each party an incentive to come up with some other way to do those cuts. But in general, around the country, this is, again, failing in episode 2012, this is not a time when you can be giving a robust call for increased defense spending. The best you can be is what Speaker Gingrich articulated. And I think I'm saying again, I don't think there will be functionally, rhetorically, a heck of a lot of difference between the Republican nominee and how the president will talk about these issues.
So let me ask all of you, and I guess I'll start with you, Bill, since you're the resident pollster here. When you look at polling of how Americans now see our role in the world, given the economic situation we are in, how would you describe American public opinion when they say, this is the way I see our role?
Well, that's on your money. I have to be careful. I was doing a pitch once, and there's all these people asking questions, and I said, well, that's a really good question. And the other guy said, so mine was stupid? So I don't want to say, well, that's a thoughtful question, as opposed to the last 20 minutes, but that's an especially thoughtful question. So let me put it this way, which is, let's understand that, let's look at the bell curve of life, okay? On the bell curve of life, on the far right, you have the core Republican primary voters, which are about, let's say, 25-20% of the country, who are absolute core, kind of part of the Republican base. You've got about 25-30% of the core Democrat base, and then you have kind of the folks in the middle. This notion of American exceptionalism is strength, and the notion in this country, we should talk about this country being special, that we're comfortable saying that we have a role in the world that is deserved, that we are the greatest force for peace in the history of the world. All of that stuff is essentially like a 70% view amongst core Republican primary voters, but it doesn't migrate. It's not something that those folks in the middle want to talk about. And so what I think is you don't have a view. What I think you share in common is fatigue. Here are the things that you think in common. You share a fatigue in this country after the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. you have a belief that this is a country that wants to do more at home and less around the world. I think that's the dominant view around those in the middle. And you have this split where there is this American exceptionalism, and then you have, I think, almost an equal number of people who say we cannot be the world's policeman and that they drift towards America's been a bully. And for those folks in the middle, I think those folks in the middle are saying, please, let's talk about our problems and solve this country's troubles, not try to do everything else around the world. And I think that, and then I think that instinct, and we can track this, we do this for the United Nations Foundation and from some other groups here, that instinct that says that we're overexposed and we've done too much around the world had dropped when Obama became president and is back again climbing. And so, again, as always, the way you have to win a Republican primary and rhetorically win a Republican primary, or frankly, a Democrat primary, if they were running this year, doesn't really match that kind of dominant, kind of fed up, tired, fatigued kind of center of the electorate.
I know I probably sound like a broken record, but I think just because something is an important issue or question doesn't mean it's a relevant one to the outcome of the election. And I suspect that there are probably more people in this room who think a lot about America's role in the world than there are in the entire city of Akron, Ohio.
Well,
it's probably unfortunate, but it is what it is.
Okay, well, I think you may be right. So let me open this up to questions now from the audience, since we do have people here who are thinking thoughtful things about America's role in the world. And yes, sir.
Yeah, Mitchell Krause from the Stamford, Connecticut World Affairs Forum. I'd like to ask generally about President Eisenhower's warning about the military-industrial complex. And in this era of defense cuts, which are looming, large campaign contributors are the defense industries. To what degree is anything really significant going to happen in cutting the budget of the Pentagon and our weapons systems, given this dynamic?
Who would like to start with that?
I think there's going to be a lot of fighting and conversation, discussion about how much to cut, what to cut, which programs to delete, which ones to scale back, push back, all of that. But to be honest, I think on a scale of what will weaken, what will endanger our troops, what will endanger our national safety versus PAC or lobbyist money. And I think the ratio is probably going to be about 20-to-1. The perception of what our, what helps provide for our safety, the safety of our troops, that sort of thing. I realize as a journalist, I'm probably not supposed to think this, but I think the role of money in politics on questions like this is dramatically overrated. I think a lot more members are a heck of a lot more afraid of being perceived as endangering troops, endangering our nation's safety, than they are about taking off a lobbyist for Lockheed Martin. I don't think that's as big a deal as people who read all of the campaign finance stories in the papers would like to.
And I also think defense spending is a jobs issue in members' home districts.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was going to say that the thing that makes it difficult is these large contractors have spent a lot of money to make sure their stuff is built, assembled, and parts come from 238, 387 congressional districts. And they have done a really good job of making sure that all of those, that as many congressional districts as possible have some fragment of that money. And it is, and what I'm agreeing with Charlie is that the pernicious part, if you are on the side of wanting to see it cut, is understanding that for each individual member of Congress, the appeal is that here's our local jobs that depend on this contract. And those members are kind of doing their job, meaning they're trying to represent their district. But the amount of money is so vast, and the spread of where these parts and where the stuff is made and assembled is so large that it's that is the part that makes change and significant cuts very difficult.
Ina Karim from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania Council. My question is, Do you see Patriot Act as an issue for this election? Or you think the American people just simply don't care about it, kind of giving up your civil liberty for the national security?
Just very quick, again, as a pollster, I talked about the bell curve, you know, like the very extremes of the Republican Party, the very extremes of the Democratic Party. The Patriot Act is sort of interest because it's one issue where the absolute extremes of both parties actually agree. Because there's a very substantial libertarian streak in the Republican Party that's incredibly concerned about the issues of personal liberty regarding the Patriot Act, and the far left, they have the same concern. And so what I would say functionally is that it's a really intriguing issue because there are not a heck of a lot of things where those ends of the bell curve have similar concerns and they come to the same conclusions and doubts. However, again, being polite, again, I think functionally that's a decision that is outside of the realm of what most people paid attention to. The reauthorization happened, and it happened without substantial kind of public meltdown. I think the issue's been resolved as far as kind of the middle of the American public has been decided, and it's been resolved because it's invisible from their day-to-day life.
I just would say there's another important convergence to bear in mind with regard to issues like that or Guantanamo, and that's the convergence that happens whether you're Democrat or Republican when you actually have the responsibility to keep the country safe. And that is why President Obama ran in a very different way in 2007 and 2008 and has governed very differently with regard to those issues. What they learn and what they know about the threat of terrorism in the homeland is something that I think tends to move them all towards the middle when it comes to an issue like that, as unfortunate as it may be from the standpoint of civil liberties. And there's no getting away from that. And especially in a context where there is zero tolerance for a single death in the homeland.
Yes.
I'm Christopher Katrakis, a student from St. John's College. My question is about the state of political discourse at the moment. A term I've heard a lot both in the media and in other places is isolationism. I'm questioning its use in terms of defining our options in relation to the rest of the world. So for example, I'm coming from the perspective of an independent voter who's not affiliated with either party. It doesn't seem like there's room in our current discourse for a position that is maybe not anti-war, maybe not pro-war, but reluctant for war. I'm not quite sure why resistance to the war in Libya or maybe even to Iraq must be labeled isolationist, just as I'm not sure that arguing for such intervention should be seen as hawkish. So I'm wondering, is it just because there's no convenient term that captures that middle ground that no one seems to be supporting it and talking about it? Or is there really just no interest among the parties themselves to try to ride this position that I think is very prevalent?
Are you saying the media oversimplifies?
I might be implying that just a little bit.
How would you say that?
Well, I mean, the thing is, when I talk about isolationism, I'm not thinking in the context of Afghanistan or Iraq, for example. When you hear Ron Paul talk about bringing the troops home from South Korea, when you hear, Paul talk about, bringing, how many troops we have based in Europe, pre-deployed forces around the world that aren't necessarily conflict area. Now, maybe we should bring them home, maybe not. But the thing is, the view of just sort of bring the footprint of where our military is anywhere in the world and bring them back home, whether it's the right idea or the wrong idea, I define that as isolationism. And, whether you want to interpret that as it's not intended to be pejorative or descriptive of people who think that we should not have a lot of forces around the world and be, actively involved in, at the front end in terms of projecting U.S. influence or at least having people abroad that could step into, emergency situations around the world. So, I don't think I've slandered you at all. I mean, maybe I have, I don't think so.
Okay, next.
Good morning. My name is Leslie Anwarbe. I'm a student from Pollster School of Medicine and Health Sciences in Puerto Rico, and my question is the following. We've talked in the last day and a half of different issues, from education to national security and the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. However, how can the American people see positive changes in all of the aspects that are and will be discussed in this conference when government representatives from both parties can't seem to work together to make quick and swift decisive decisions that are needed today? One example being the budget committee resolution that ends on the 18th of November.
Don?
Well, I think that speaks to what everyone they've been saying, which is that the real issues here are the complete collapse and failure of our governing class to be able to get the job done. And that from the standpoint of the presidential election, the president's been the leader, he's the president, and so he has to bear a very heavy burden with regard to that, but obviously Congress and Republicans in Congress have held their ground and have been as responsible, if not more so. So it's a big issues. And you know, from the standpoint of business and economics, there are a lot of people who will tell you that our businesses are beginning to move forward. They look pretty well. You look at the quarterly earnings reports, and a lot of people are looking very good. And there's a lot of cash in all these businesses, but they won't invest, they won't hire because they're worried that our government is singularly incapable of doing the big things, even some of the small things that have to be done. And you look abroad in the rest of the world, I mean, we've got the G20 conference going on right now, and America's voice in being able to move the Eurozone towards a conclusion of that crisis is severely muted because of the debt and budgetary situations that we face here today. We basically, it shuts our mouth. There's not much we can say about it. That is foreign policy. That is national security. And until we get straight on all of those things, and I agree with what Senator Wood said about it, we can't really move forward and be the leader in the world that people expect us to be.
Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Chip Bowman from the United States Naval Academy. Earlier, you all spoke on China being a threat. The American people's perception is China being a threat. However, earlier this year, when President Hu came over to the U.S., he explicitly said that he did not see China as a competitor or as a threat to the United States, nor is his mission for China to ever be that. But that the relationship between the United States and China should be based on mutual respect and trust. And so my question to you is a two-part question. One, do you feel that the American people just have a misguided view of China, or do you feel that President Hu isn't being exactly transparent with his goals like China typically is conceived as being?
I can answer that.
Okay.
Yes. Both are true.
I think, again, I do some work in Australia, New Zealand, and sort of that area. If you talk to those folks, they are scared to death about the Chinese reach and the paralyzing view that America is not going to really intervene and stop the Chinese kind of their reach and scope in terms of that entire region of the world. And I believe their ambitions are a good deal more aggressive than what was stated. But let me go back to a polling point of view, because it's actually very interesting. We do a lot of trend questions, and things take forever to change. So there's a question saying that we do, who do you think will be the leading world power in 20 years? And in like 2006 or 7, before they collapsed by 20, 30 points, people said America over China. 18 months in that collapse, people picked China over America, meaning that this country moved 20, 25 net points in 16, 17 months. And given this country's view about America being the leader of the world, that is shocking and profound. And the pace at which that has happened during this economic recession, and the pace at which people not only see them as an economic power, but they're waking up to saying that, oh, guess what, the leverage is beyond economic power. And here's one, it's pretty subtle, but as a Naval Academy student, the Chinese are creating these mineral rights contracts all through Africa. There's about 6 or 12 national essential minerals that are required for our high-tech and defense stuff, all of which are being gobbled up by Chinese contracts. They are, in a very thoughtful and an admirable, systematic way, looking at like 20, 30, 40 years in advance, and their role, an emerging role in Africa, why this country is like tired, fatigue, and all that stuff, is a really critical story. And the extent to which they're using, and now really using, their economic leverage for their foreign policy and to extend their influence is a really important trend. And I believe I believe this is hugely important. I'm just saying however hugely important I'm describing this stuff, it is light years ahead away from where the public is conscious and aware right now. But my point is, believe me, talk to the folks in Australia and New Zealand about their concerns about China as a military power, and it would sound vastly different in day-to-day conversation than it sounds in America.
One last question.
Thank you. Good morning. Nigel Sutton, Raytheon in D.C. Two quick questions if I can. The first one is the president's approval rating, 41%, tracking similarly to where Reagan was, 84, at the 13th quarter in the election cycle. However, the difference was he was recovering from bringing unemployment down from 9.1 to about 7.5. Do you think the president, based on trend lines, can recover from that? And what narrative would he do to do that? And the second one, quick one in the Senate, Charlie. Where do you think the Senate's going to go?
Why don't you go first? You're the pollster. You're encumbered by facts. And then I'll...
You can go to our website, pos.org, and we have a PowerPoint called a pivot point looking at the impact of the debt ceiling. And we track the Michigan Consumer Sentiment Confidence Index for these three presidents, Reagan, Obama, and I don't know one other. But the point here is that we all need to remember that from 82 to 84, Ronald Reagan had 6 quarters in a row of 7% growth, quarter after quarter after quarter. And I want to make sure everyone here knows, I might be the hard partisan. If President Obama was enjoying 5 or 6 quarters in a row of 7% growth quarter after quarter, I have no doubt that the demands of job approval would go up and his re-election prospects would be radically different. But what we're looking at instead is hopefully 2.5%, 3%. And no, without a huge event in this country, without a single event in the world, we're on a glide path where his approval locks in the low to mid-40s. We're on a glide path where his vote is within margin of error of his job approval. He's going to get 44 to 47% of the vote. And the issue is whether that's enough to win in a two-person, lose in a two-person race, or win if we have a 3 or 4 person race. And the mood is so unstable, I believe the most likely outcome is a multiple candidate field where the president's re-election prospects are affected because there is a very unpredictable 3rd or 4th party that takes this election into some uncharted territory.
Who's your third party candidate?
Oh, it doesn't matter.
That's not the answer.
No,
Like
what I'm saying is that it's, remember in high school history you do, the events make the person make the events. I was always in high school history, it's the events make the person, and my polling now proves that I was right at 16 when I was snottier. What I'm saying is that what happens is the public mood collapses and then someone fills that vacuum. And I will be one shocked puppy if we have a 2-person race with candidates 3rd, 4th party against you, 3 or 4% of the vote. I think we're leading to a different result. But no, I don't believe the president's going to spend $1 billion. I think the president can improve his standing. I think he can increase intensity amongst the support. I think he can increase Latino and African American turnout. I think he can do lots of things to push himself and find a way to win. I think that's possible. But a fundamental shift of where his standing is, his job approval, it would take an event of enormous magnitude to change his glad path. And it's the kind of event no one here really wants to have happen because it's so dramatic and so profoundly potentially sad, we don't want it to happen.
Charlie,
the NBC Wall Street Journal poll, which Bill does along with Peter Hart, that's like the gold standard. I mean, it's just a fabulous poll. And each time the survey comes out, I know MSNBC and the Wall Street Journal both put their questionnaire up. And I highly recommend you go through and look at it because the thing is, 95% of the data is not in the articles in the Wall Street Journal or on NBC News, but there's just a lot of food for thought in there. I'm a bigger fan on a day-to-day basis because that's such a fabulous poll. It only comes out roughly once a month, and so we don't have the benefit of daily data there. I'm a bigger fan of the Gallup poll than Bill is, but it comes out every day at about 103, 104. And, right now, as of yesterday, well, the president's approval rating for his 11th quarter in office was 41%. For the month of September, it was 41%. I haven't seen the October monthly number, but I assume it was probably about 42. He seemed to have ticked up just a tiny bit after, and whether it's a result of Gaddafi's death or not, I don't know, but he was at 45% of the 3-day moving average through the day before yesterday, and 43%, I think it was the day before. So we had ticked up a little bit, but my guess is it's probably kind of a temporary blip, kind of like after Bin Laden was killed. But basically, he's been in the 41, 42% range for a while. And historically, pre-1 year out, job approval ratings are not a particularly predictive value. But starting about a year out, every month that comes by, the approval rating becomes a better predictor of how an incumbent president's going to do. So by the time you get to election day, if a president's above the 48, 49, 50 range, he's going to win. And if he's below that point, historically, he loses. And so I think I would just sort of watch that very, very closely. But it's been, 42, 43 lately is where it is. I agree with Bill. I mean, I think that unless the economy turns around significantly, there could be marginal improvement in his numbers, but I think it's within the margins. I mean, the fact is, if you go through from when they started coming out with the monthly numbers for unemployment, the Bureau of Labor Statistics website, you look at January of 1948 through the end of the George W. Bush's administration, you will find a grand total through all those presidents of 20 months of unemployment that was 9.0% or higher, a total of 20 months. Right now, in this administration, we're looking at 27 out of the last 29 months. It's been 9.0% or higher. Now, without saying whose fault it was or anything like that, that is a horrific place to be, and that's a very hard place to sort of move up from unless you have significant improvements.
And Charlie, can I just say that even when Osama bin Laden was killed, Barack Obama's poll numbers spiked for like a day, 2 days, 3 days, and then went right back down. So it didn't really help him that much. Don, do you want to add before we end?
No, I don't disagree with any of this. The only thing I'd say, there are two sort of principal pillars, I think, for the American people. One is called peace, and the other is called prosperity. If you don't have prosperity, you might as well argue peace. So, I think that's one of the things they've got to play on. And there will be a sense of, though it hasn't worked so well for them, just like Tony Blair, when he ran for his third term as prime minister, ordered, forward, not back. When it comes to the peace pillar, forward, not back, I think will be the argument.
Well, thank you all very much. Thank you, Gloria.